Okay, it's 2 o'clock now, and I would like to give you all a warm welcome to the webinar on life science in ERC. My name is Anne Rocker Jørgensen, and I'm a national contact point for the ERC here in Denmark. And my work is to hand out information about ERC to Danish stakeholders, and I'm the organizer of this webinar today. If you do have any questions during or after the presentations of this webinar, please use the Q&A function to ask questions. I would say a brief presentation on where I'm situated. I work in what is called the Eurocenter, where all the national contact points for the various programs in Horizon Europe are situated here in Denmark. We are part of the Danish Ministry for Science and Higher Education, and our services is to give guidance on where to choose the right topics in Horizon Europe, the right topics in action and so on. And we also give advice on administration procedures and so on. We do trainings, both on-site trainings and also a lot of webinars. Training is sort of seems to be a thing that is quite popular and in high demand here after COVID. And we also help with partner search and so on. And you can always contact us if you have any questions on various parts of Horizon Europe, and we are free to use for Danish stakeholders. We have a lot of activities. We have a really big web page with a lot of information, both in English but mainly in Danish. We have sort of more detailed information on Horizon Europe and what is funded in Horizon Europe and so on. We also publish a magazine called EU Indblik a couple of times a year. It's only in Danish, but it's sort of a printed magazine you can subscribe to for free and get it by mail. Of course, we do a lot of webinar courses, information meetings, and so on. And you can always invite us if you want the presentation on various parts of Horizon Europe. We have a lot of social media presence to sort of highlight all the options we have in Horizon Europe. This is in brief what we do. Now I will sort of say a bit about the program of this webinar. We have a really impressive lineup of speakers. First, I will give this word to Professor and Vice President of the ERC, Jesper Sveistrup, who is based at the University of Copenhagen. Then we will have a presentation by Head of Unit Philip Coopers from ERC's agency in Brussels. And then lastly, we will have a presentation by Professor Emilia Elena Rotaruy at the University of Southern Denmark, who is a ERC grantee and got a ERC grant in 2021. And then we have time for questions, and we will do a roundup at the end of the webinar. This webinar is a series of in total 4 webinars on ERC. We did one already in January on social science and humanities in the ERC. Then we do one the 22nd of February on physical sciences and engineering, where we also have a very impressive lineup of speakers, both from Denmark and from the ERC's agency in Brussels. And then we will finish off with a webinar the 27th of February, where we will give some attention to the ERC proof of concept grants you can apply for once you have an ERC grant. And we also have some really VIP speakers for that event. But it was a really brief introduction from me, and I will pass on the word to Professor Jesper Sveistrup.
All right, I hope you can see my screen now. All right, very good. Thank you very much, Anne. Yes, my name is Jesper Sveistrup. I'm the Vice President of the European Research Council with responsibility for life sciences. And I'll give you a sort of a more broad introduction to what the ERC is. And then Philippe will take over to give you much more specific and hopefully very helpful information about how to apply and how you are assessed at the ERC. So what is the ERC? Well, ERC is part of Horizon Europe, and it has a special status on the Horizon Europe in that the main regulatory say that EU has over the ERC is actually via the funding amount. ERC was set up from the beginning in 2007 or so to be fiercely independent with almost full autonomy, except for certain practical aspects of running its business, if you want. For example, ERC is dependent on the IT systems of the EU, something that some of you may have lived to regret. Our budget is very large, more than 16 billion over the lifetime of the framework that are given to excellent proposals. And indeed, this has been an explosive growth in ERC amount. You can see that when it started in 2007, it was about 250 million, and now we are on an annual basis in a completely different place. It's risen almost tenfold, and this of course has had great implications for how to run a funding agency like this, and Philippe has been part of much of that evolution. It is a very impressive structure, and I'm proud to be part of it. So it's fair to say that ERC is different. Really, the only criterion for getting a grant is scientific excellence. It's support to individual scientists or scientist groups, not large consortia, not large collaborative approaches to science. Importantly, there are no predetermined subjects. This is not a call. You decide what you want to work on. If it's good enough, we will give you the money to do it. So this is a bottom-up approach. This is real support to frontier research in all fields of science and the humanities. And the decision about whether to fund or not is based on international peer review, both the panel that sits and make the final decisions and the external reviewers who provide written information about or written opinions about the research are from all over the world, basically. The scientific governance of the ERC, as I said, is a bit special in that there's an independent scientific council with 22 members, including the ERC president, and we actually have full authority over the strategy of the ERC. The only thing we can't control is how much money we got. That is decided by others. But other than that, it's fair to say that we decide how this is done, and this means that ERC is really for the scientist, by the scientists, because we are all scientists on this council. And this, of course, as I said, is supported by a dedicated implementation structure, the ERC Executive Agency. So ERC basically allows creative freedom for the individual grantee, and it does so by offering independence, recognition, and visibility to work on a research topic of your own choice with a team of your own choice. It enables you to gain true financial autonomy for 5 years. And of course, to negotiate with your host institution to make sure that you get the best conditions for work. You can very often use an ERC grant as a leverage to get better conditions. With an ERC grant, you are very often, or almost always, able to attract absolutely fantastic team members, both EU and non-EU members, and collaborators. Also, if you decide to all of a sudden move, this is a portable grant. You can get it in Germany and move to Denmark, or the other way around. That is perfectly okay. It goes with the team. And of course, ERC is a quality label. It makes it possible to attract additional funding and certainly to gain a lot of recognition. So ERC has a number of different grant schemes. It started out basically with one grant, kind of grant. You could say that's today's advanced grants, which for all researchers, but typically were given to very senior researchers. Since then, lots of new possibilities of being funded have occurred. There are the starting grants, which are for people starting out their own research, independent research labs, for example, in the life sciences. These are given for typically people who are 2 to 7 years after their PhD, and it's up to 1.5 million euros for over 5 years. Then there are the consolidated grants, which are 7 to 12 years after PhD and gives you up to 2 million euros for 5 years. And finally, of those classical grants, if you want, the advanced grants, which are basically the most senior researchers. Track record of scientific research achievement is expected over the last 10 years or so, and it's up to 2.5 million for 5 years. And then we also have the synergy grants, which are more sort of collaborative grants. 2 to 4 PIs get a substantial amount of money, 10 million euros for up to 6 years. And actually one of those PIs can be based outside the EU, which is unusual, but has actually given this platform a great impact. And then there are the proof of concept grants, but smaller grants, which are lump sums of 150,000 euros for people who've already had an ERC grant to bridge the gap between their research and the very early stage of marketable innovation. And I really think that if you're already an ERC holder or you know of ERC holders as an institution, these are not impossible to get, let me put it that way. There's a high success rate. If you have a good idea somewhere to go with this, go for it. There's a good chance you'll get it. All right, it's very important to sort of kill some rumors and make sure that you guys spread the word about this. Contrary to what you may think, all scientific fields are eligible for ERC funding. There is no such thing as, oh, ERC is not interested in my field. It might not be described in great detail, oh, this fits my research, but there's always a panel that is interested in you. So there are no predetermined priorities for the ERC. We fund great research, excellent research, whatever it is. So the ERC panel structure doesn't represent priorities. These are simply groupings that give you an idea whether you might fit in this grouping rather than another one. This can sometimes be difficult to decide, and you might want to take advice on where to go with your proposal. So the budget is distributed among panels as a function of demand, and I'll get back to that later. It basically means that the more applicants there is for a certain panel, the more money that panel has to distribute. So don't be concerned about, oh, I'm applying to a really big panel, it's going to be impossible. No, the success rates are actually the same for all panels. Importantly, the host institution is not an evaluation criterion. It's not so that, oh, I'm only at University of so-and-so. I don't have a chance against these people from University of Cambridge or Oxford or whatever, which is such an important or a very famous institution. It doesn't matter where you are, it matters who you are. Actually, societal impact is not an evaluation criterion. It doesn't mean that ERC doesn't have impact. It just means it's not part of what we decide funding on. Actually, some people don't know is that you can also propose things that don't last 5 years. That's also a very welcome thing. It's the content of the research budget that determines, the content of the proposed research that decides how much you can apply for. Of course, your career stage and context matter, and this will be taken into account so that, for example, if you spent many years running an institute, it won't give you a lot of points, but at least it'll be a context that's taken into consideration when your perhaps somewhat decreased productivity during this specific period has been taken into account. Importantly, publication record per se is not decisive for funding conditions. If you have a great project and you've shown you can lead great research, then that's all that matters. And also, already having an ERC grant does not in any way guarantee you getting another one. Each proposal is basically evaluated on its own merit in comparison with the competing pool of applications. So there's no renewal. There's no such thing as a renewal at the ERC. It's a new project, and in many ways, it's an advantage to have a brand new project rather than continuing on what you always did. All right, so let's have a little bit of a look at success rates. The ERC care greatly about having the similar success rate across the different domains. Of course, we can't have the similar success rate across countries because different countries do better than others. It's classical that countries like Switzerland and Israel and so on actually are doing extremely well. They have as you can see, very, very high success rates of 19 and 21%. Denmark is not doing too bad at all. And actually, when you think about the population size, Denmark is doing extremely well. And I think that's worth keeping in mind that, again, Switzerland and Israel, small countries that are associated countries, are doing really, really well. But actually, Denmark, in terms of population size, is doing better than heavyweights such as the UK and Germany. I think we can be proud of that. And it should also give you some confidence to apply for an ERC grant. So the ERC is doing really well, but actually we have some challenges, especially in the life sciences domain. I think that's illustrated very nicely on this slide here is that there's sort of been an erosion of the LS domain. When it started out in 2007, 2008, as you can see, 45% or so were from the physical sciences and engineering, 35% were life sciences, and less than 20% were social sciences and humanities applications. This has changed quite dramatically, and you can see that now actually the number of applications from the SH domain have overtaken LS. And this is a problem in the sense that we get less money to distribute. And we are doing what we can to sort of understand why this is happening. I have my own theories. I think it's much easier to know where you are in the sort of on the ladder of excellence in an LS domain where we publish in journals, whereas in the SH domain, it might be less obvious whether you are a superstar or just plain bad. You don't know before you apply. And this means that LS researchers who think they don't have a chance stop applying. This creates a negative cycle, actually, where we get fewer applications, therefore less money, and therefore we give even less money out. And we need to change this. And I think it's really important to keep in mind that budgets are allocated to the 27 panels as a function of demand. So if you apply, there is more money for that panel, and therefore it is important to not only apply yourself, but make sure that people from your institution apply, because that's the only way we can change this trend. We will try other things at the ERC, at the LS domain, but it is a real challenge we're facing right now. All right, but I think I will stop here. And as Anna said, I think it's possible to ask questions afterwards. But with this, I will hand over to Philippe, who will give the next presentation on more specific issues regarding applying and how things are looked at. Philippe, over to you.
Thanks a lot, Jesper. Can you hear me well? I think it works okay. So thanks a lot to the organizers. Thank you, Jesper. And it will be my pleasure to say a few more words about how to apply to the ERC. And I also would like to give you a bit more insights about how to find more about the boundaries and the remits of the different panels in the life sciences. So on the next slides, and the next one too, first of all, as Jesper just mentioned, please don't hesitate to apply. It's only by receiving excellent ideas that the ERC can flourish. And please be also aware that you're not alone. You can receive help from your national contact points. You can receive help from the local offices of your institutions, but you can also receive help from the website of the ERC. And I really draw your attention to these 7 videos that you can find here on that web link, which is mentioned here below. And those videos are called ERC classes. They are about how to what to consider before sending an application, writing an application, how to write an application for the part B1 and part B2, how does the evaluation work, and how to prepare for an interview. This is really helpful. Those are very good tutorials, and I really advise you to have a look at that before sending an application. On the next slides, you will also see that there are different panels within the ERC. This is what we call the ERC panel structure. There are a total of 11 panels in the physical science and engineering domain, a total of 7 panels in the social science and humanities. I don't show them here, although you may also be interested by those. But there are also a total of 9 panels in the life sciences. And you will see that those 9 panels actually are going from the molecular biology up to the biotechnology. And for each of those panels, you will see that they have a title, they have a subtitle, and they have descriptors. And here I showcase the example of the LS1 panel, whose title are Molecules of Life, Biological Mechanisms, Structures, and Functions. It has a subtitle that explains a bit more what are the type of disciplines which are encompassed in this panel. And then it has descriptors. Please be aware that those descriptors are not at all topics, are not at all priorities or whatever. They are only there to give you some insights about which type of expertise you may expect to find in those specific panels. This is the point. So I will not go through all different panels one by one. This will be a bit too long and too tedious. And I will now jump to the next slides, explaining how you need to prepare and what you need to expect when you prepare an application. As I mentioned, you will have to choose one of those panels where to apply. Either one of the 9 panels in the life sciences, one of the 11 in PE, or in one of the 7 in SH. I guess you are more interested by the life sciences. You will have to choose one of the 9 in life sciences. And you can only tick one panel. You will see that in principle, the proposal is evaluated in the panel which is chosen by the applicant. And only in exceptional cases, a proposal may be transferred from one panel to the other. This can happen because it can be a clear mistake from the applicants, or because the expertise where the applicant wants to be evaluated is not available in that panel, but present in another panel. This does not concern a lot of application, maybe maximum 1%, if my recollection is correct. And of course, we need to have the agreement there of both panel chairs. So as I mentioned, you need to tick one main panel. You may also, if you so wish, choose a secondary panel that can be either within the life sciences or beyond the life science in a different domain. This has to be explained in the Part B1. And typically, if you do so, reviewers from both panels will be used. About the reviewers, the choice of the reviewers is decided by the panel chair for each proposal. So for each panel, we have a bunch of experts called panel members, and one of them will be the panel chair. And this panel chair will do the panel member assignment for each proposal. And a proposal that is submitted to one panel may require sometimes a reviewer from another panel. Can perfectly happen. A proposal that has ticked a secondary panel or a keywords from a second panel may or may not require a reviewer from the secondary panel. This is decided by the panel chair. It all depends on the scientific expertise which is present in a given panel. On the next slides. I've discussed and I've explained to you what was about the panel titles, subtitles, and descriptors. As I mentioned, this is really information for applicants. Those descriptors are not exhaustive, and as I mentioned, they do not correspond to any classification, to any priorities. Any topic, any field of research is equally welcome, whether listed or not within the descriptors. Keep this well aware about. Descriptors, as I mentioned, are and 3 keywords that you can use, as I mentioned, can be used by the panel chair to assign the reviewers. So choose carefully the descriptor that you are ticking. And as I mentioned, if a proposal is across panel domains or across different panel, the reviewer from both panels can be used. Just make sure to explain that in your proposal. Now, there were typically a lot of questions about the boundaries and the remits of the different panels. What are those panels about? Which type of research areas can they cover? Instead of going, as I mentioned, one panel, one by one, I think it's much easier if I direct you to 2 different tools where you can really get familiarized with the nature and the remit of each panel. And those are the ERC Data Hub of funded projects, and also the ERC portfolio analysis. I will go one by one in the next slides. You can always also consult the composition of the previous panels. This is also something that you can do. The composition of those previous panels are published by the ERC on a regular basis. Now let's go to all those 2 different tools. First, the Data Hub of funded projects. This is a website hosted by the ERC where you can see all the grants that we have and that we are funding. So for example, here in this map, you can see all the life sciences projects, and you can click on the different cities and countries to see where you can find whatever you want. You can see the details of the projects, the published summary, and you can see the type of grant, you can see the PI, and you can see also the funding that they receive. On the next slide, you can sort this in the way you want. You see here the 9 LS panels, LS1 from the molecules of life until the LS9 biotech, biosystems engineering. In between, you have all the integrative biology, you have the cellular biology, you have the physiology and disease, neuroscience, immunity, infection immunotherapy. Then you have more LS7 panel, which is a more clinical research panel. You have then a panel more focusing on environmental biology, ecology, and evolution. And as I mentioned, the biotech at the end. This is a view of all LS panels. And if you wish, you can even in this data hub, click on the country where you want to find more information. In this case, I showcase the example of Denmark, where you can see that there are about 100 grants in the life science funded in Denmark. On the next one, you can play in the way you want. Here, for example, I clicked on the LS4 panel, physiology in health, disease and aging. And on that basis, you can see all the different details of each of the project which is funded in the LS4. And this gives you really a very good idea of which type of research is covered by each of those panels. This is the best way for you to familiarize with this kind of item. And on the next slide, you can even go into more details. For example, here, I've clicked on the LS4, physiology in health, disease and aging, only grants in Denmark, and we have made a zoom on the University of Copenhagen. And you see, you can click on each of those 9 projects which are funded there, and you see all the details, the title, the abstracts, the recipient, in this case, Professor Becker Jensen, who has a consolidated grant in LS4 for close to 2 million, and starting 1st of June 20, ending up in May 25. That's the first tool, and this is really helpful. We have many people using this on an everyday basis. The second one, next slide, is what we call an ENC portfolio analysis. It really gives you a map of what is funded by the ENC. And this map is organized as fact sheets for each of the 25 panels that were active in Horizon 2020. It provides an overall budget, the geographical distribution, the topics which are covered within these specific panels, and the synergies that they have between the different disciplines. We also have a fact sheet on the synergy grant for you to know. I put here the websites. How is it looking like on the next slides? I took here, yes, it's again the example of the LS4. You see here the distribution by country. You see the amount of grants which have been funded for the LS4, 238 projects. You see the budgets. You see also on the right side, the different disciplines and topics which are typical from these LS4 panels. For example, disciplines, pathophysiology, cancer, cardiovascular, cell biology, physiology. Then we have some topics which are, for example, epigenetics, cell signaling, vascular systems, whatever you can imagine. And also you see in the middle right side, which are the connection between those disciplines and topics in this panel. So this is really giving you a lot of details about the boundaries of each of those panels. I invite you to have a look at this information. This is really helpful, and this is much better to have a look at that as well as on the data hub, instead of thinking and speculating on what could be or not be the remit of a specific panel. Those two tools plus the descriptor that give you an idea about the expertise present in each panel should be sufficient for you to choose the good panel to go for. On the next slide, some words about the evaluation. First of all, be aware that there are some novelties in the work program 23. This is concerning the starting and the consolidator grants. Jesper mentioned before that you were receiving, or it's possible to apply, for a starting grant between 2 to 7 years after the PhD, and for a consolidator grant between 7 and 12 years after the PhD. Now, what does it mean to have a PhD? What is the date then you have to count to start the clock? And this was quite of an issue in the past years, because it was mentioning just the date of the PhD. But the date of the PhD is something very different, in the sense that it depends on the country, it depends on the host institution, it depends on the administrative role of those host institutions and countries where they sign and deliver the PhD. So we decided to change that. And now the date of reference is the certified date of the successful defense of the PhD or equivalent doctoral degree. So it allows for a much better fairness of the eligibility window, and it also allows to better reflect the real academic age of the applicants. Be aware that you must have this date mentioned in the document that you will submit about the certified date of the successful defense. Should you not have any dates on your PhD certificate, you have to ask for a written confirmation from the awarding institution. That's really important, because in terms of eligibility process, this is something on which we are sometimes struggling and on which we don't want to bother the applicant to clarify anything in the course of the application, in the course of the evaluation. On the next slides, as I also mentioned before, and as Jesper also explained, excellence is the sole evaluation criterion. It applies to two things. On the next one, it applies on both, on the next one, yes. Yes, thank you. It applies on both the excellence of the research project, of course, but also on the excellence of the principal investigator. For the research project, it will analyze the groundbreaking nature of the project, the potential impact, the scientific approach. And for the PI, it's more the intellectual capacity, the creativity, and the commitment. This is really important to keep in mind. And there is also, you may have seen this press release that has been made in December, but there is an idea and a proposal by the Scientific Council to give more weight on the part of the research project than on the part of the principal investigator. This would come as of the work program 2024. This was the object of a press release that you may see on the ERC website. On the next slide, let me finish by giving you some details about the evaluation process per se. I guess that some of you may be familiar with that, but I think it's important to just to remind you about the fact that it's a two-step procedure, but however, it consists of a single submission, meaning that you submit at the same time the small synopsis, what we call extended synopsis, the part B1, but also the full scientific proposal, the part B2. But at the step 1, the panel members will only evaluate the extended synopsis, plus the CV. Be aware that those panel members are generalists. So you have in the number of pages that you have for this extended synopsis, you should be able to convince a bunch of generalists, a bunch of panel members who are generalists in the topic in the panel in which you apply for. It will start with what we call an individual remote evaluation. So each expert being assigned to the proposal will independently at home evaluate this proposal, this extended synopsis. They will score them, and then they gather in Brussels for a panel meeting. They discuss and they agree on a score of the proposal, A, B, or C, and they agree on the comments to be sent back to the applicant. If the proposal is scored with an A, it will be retained and will advance to the step 2. If the proposal is scored with a B or a C, it is rejected. It does not move to the step 2. You will receive feedback if you fail at this stage. The feedback consists of what I explained, these consolidated comments of the panel, together with each of the individual assessment report form of each expert having evaluated the proposal. At the step 2, the panel member will evaluate the full scientific proposal, part B1 and part B2. But this time, they will not be alone. They will be helped by what we call remote referees, who are specialists of this specific proposal that you are submitting. Those remote referees are recruited by the panel members. There's a big difference. The panel members are recruited by the Scientific Council, but the remote referees are recruited by the panel members ad hoc for a specific proposal. Then the procedure starts again. First, an individual evaluation by those panel members and remote referees. And then again, they meet for a second panel meeting in Brussels, only the panel members, not the remote referees. And the particularity of the ERC is that this time the panel meeting will have an interview with the applicant for the starting grant, the COC, and the advanced grant, also for the synergy grant, by the way. And this interview is really important, really. It can change the way panel members are seeing the proposal. So it's really important to well prepared for the interview. Again, this will be followed by a scoring and consolidated panel comments. The proposal scored A will be retained for funding if enough money. If not enough money, they will be put on what we call a reserve list. Hopefully more money comes in the course of the year, and then we can mobilize the reserve list. The proposal not recommended for funding will be scored for a B, with a B. Again, here there will be feedback that will be sent to the applicant. Again, this feedback will consist of the consolidated experts' comments, panel comments, plus each individual panel and remote referees comments. And this is how the evaluation is organized. I will stop there, and on the next slides, you will see some links that we have put for your attention in addition to these ERC classes that I mentioned before. Feel free to consult them. They are always including good information. And Jesper and I will be open for questions later on. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, both Jesper and Philippe. It was very interesting presentations. I will give the word to Emilia.
Thank you so much for having me today. So this will be a very personal account on my experience with applying for an ERC. And I've been very lucky, and I did receive one in 2022, in fact. So I've tried twice, and I will tell you a little bit about my experience in both instances and how I arrived to those ideas, and why I think I did not get it the first time and why it may have worked the second time. So a little bit about myself. I'm a biochemist turned microbiologist, more specifically a marine microbiologist. And right now I'm mostly focused on microbial interactions and interactions between microbes and environment. And a lot of this work I do is related to greenhouse gas emissions, so especially methane. I've done a lot of my career steps have been actually happening at the SDU, the University of Southern Denmark, where I started with a FNU mobility postdoc, and then I continued on my career with an assistant professor, associate professor, and professorship very recently. The reason I actually applied for this ERC consolidator was very much a self-challenge, because I've never actually attempted any European research grants, so I was very curious to see how this works, and I was interested to challenge myself and see if I could actually get it. I've heard many times from many other panels that it has a very big impact on people's careers, so I wanted to also get a career boost if possible. And I like that it was a longer timeline. So you would have to apply a lot later for funding and not over shorter periods of time, which most grant agencies give, which is like 2-3 years. So it was nice to have a 5-year time frame, which gives you really time to build quite a lot. Also the money, it was a good amount of money, which is always nice. And it was actually this time around, it was actually my last chance to apply for a consolidator, since we have this very specific time frame. So I was turning 11 years old in let's say age after PhD. So I had to give it a last shot, more or less. My experience more or less with ERC was a 50-50% success rate, right? So I had one that was successful and one that failed. But this experience has actually been quite commonly encountered in my career, at least, because I've had the same experience with other grants. So I failed a SAPER-AD before I actually had a successful SAPER-AD attempt. I've had a failed DFF2 project attempt and then a successful DFF2. Exactly the same projects became successful a year after, more or less. With the Novo Nordisk, I had a very similar experience. I had one Novo Nordisk ascending investigator attempt which failed, and then one that was successful. But with the ERC, I actually did not try with the same idea. I had 2 very different ideas that I've tested. So in 2017, I had one failed attempt at a consolidator grant, and I had one successful in 2021. My first attempt was on an idea that I was working on from starting with 2015. It was something very preliminary. I did not have a lot of experience. It was very new for me, quite a new field in general. I was going for biotechnology. It was something that I built up during my investigations on a Novo Nordisk grant that I received previously. So this actually obviously did not lead to a successful attempt. And what I kind of received from the panel was that in general, the idea was exciting, but they felt that it was not interesting enough for the biotechnology panel. So that's pretty much the, let's say, in a nutshell, their comments. When I wrote the second time an ERC grant, I started around 2020, and I've been building this idea over many, many years. So it's something that, let's say, this is kind of what I'm working on. So it was not so, I would imagine that the panel did not feel that I was so new to this topic. It was something where I've been consolidating my career on. So it was a much better, let's say, topic, much more suitable for the type of grant I was applying for. So that ended up being successful. However, one, let's say, note is that in 2017, I actually pretty much wrote down both of these ideas and I sent them out to a lot of people, from ERC grantees at advanced level to very young researchers that were kind of getting up in their field. And I had very much like a uniform result. Everybody suggested that the 2017 idea was preferred, and yet that's the one that failed. So I don't know. I have not tried this idea again, so I will see. Maybe I will. Maybe I will try it in a next round. We will see in the future where it goes. But the final one, the idea that actually worked, it has, as I already mentioned, it has emerged over many years. And what I've done in advance or prior to writing this idea down was I've been collecting a lot of information from all the relevant panels that were kind of suitable to my topic. So I've looked at, for example, I've actually used this data hub that Philippe was mentioning quite a lot. So I've been looking at all the abstracts from the panel that I thought was very appropriate for my proposal. And I'm sorry, that was the PE10. And then I've also looked at panels in the life sciences, quite a few of those. And I've collected all this information, the keywords, to kind of get a sense of what worked and what would be the best option for me. One of the problems was that in 2021, when I was submitting my application, in fact, there were quite severe changes in the life science panels. So there were lots of different panels that changed, let's say, what would be covered. So it was not the same like previous years. However, I've screened a lot of these previous abstracts. I've made keyword clouds and tried to kind of figure out how my topic was fitting in that panel. And I did check actually the background of previous panel members to get a good sense of it. My biggest concern was pretty much this, which is written by Jacob Krejcir in The Art of Grantsmanship, that good writing will not save bad ideas, but bad writing can kill good ones. So I was very, very nervous that I'm not going to write my idea well enough to actually send a good message to the panel and to maybe carry over the first step where you will have all these non-specialists reading your application. So I was very nervous that my language might be a bit too nerdy for the, let's say, the common reader. So what I actually did, I did get help with my writing. So at SDU at that time, we had some very nice courses with a career, a writing coach that was very much focused on academic writing. And do not imagine that she could actually help you full on write your proposal, but what she did was just kind of listen to the idea, and you had to explain it in much simpler language than you would usually explain your idea for a scientific audience. And that worked really well for me. So this was a great way to actually convey the story to a much broader audience rather than very focused at, let's say, a group of people that pretty much understands only my very narrow science topic. And I've actually used this at the same time for another application, because I was writing another grant at the same time with the ERC, which was quite a challenge, let's put it that way. So I was rewriting a Novo Nordisk Ascending Investigator grant just the months before I started writing the ERC, or more or less at the same time. So that was quite difficult. But this writing coach helped more or less clean up, let's say, and make the ideas a lot simpler for the normal audience. And that was really great. So when I started writing, I let's say, contradictory to the opinions of other people that wrote their own ERC applications, I started with the long part. The reason for that was that in my previous experience, I really, really struggled very much with going from the short form to the long form. So I decided this time around, I'm going to write the long part first, because I will expand and write everything I have to write about in this part B2. I am assuming it will work very differently for each person. So this is probably a personal, let's say, experience, but for me, this was the best way. So I mainly wrote this first part between January and March 2021. And I started writing the first draft of the short part quite late, unfortunately. This is when I could. It worked. Nevertheless, it worked. So that's very fortunate. And I was uploading all these versions quite early, because I was concerned that if things are not working towards the end, because sometimes you have issues with the online kind of uploading of the ERC, then it was actually a good idea to upload them quite early and make sure that at least some versions are already available. And then I pretty much had my final changes very close to the deadline, which was announced quite late. So I think at that time it was a lot of impact of the COVID crisis. So the announcement came really just a couple of weeks to a month before that we will be having a deadline on the 21st of April 2021. So that's when it got submitted. So it's been a bit hectic, which I am absolutely not recommending. This is what not to do. I strongly advise that you start maybe a month earlier. For me, it wasn't possible because I was writing another grant, but I think giving it time, it would be really great. Luckily, I did get a lot of input from other people. So the idea was already formulated more or less before December, and the writing part took a very long time itself. But I did have the chance to have a lot of really great people that already had a good experience with the ERC grants in the past. So they would actually give me feedback quite soon after I've sent my versions, which was nice. And I strongly recommend that. The difficulties I personally experienced was pretty much related to the structure, how to best explain the novelty, considering that I've been working on this topic for many, many years. And to me, it almost seems like, of course, this is the next thing I should be doing, but it was not as easy to say, this is really not known to anybody else, it's just known to you. So it's quite a novel topic and a lot of questions that are opened due to previous research that I have been doing. So making those things clear were quite a challenge, because to me it seemed like it's just how it's supposed to be. And that's because I've been working for a very long time on this topic. Then another thing that I thought was really difficult to make a very clear statement about is regarding aspects that were very high risk, high gain. So I would say these were the three major issues. So the reason I had difficulties with the structure and making sure that this is spot on was that I was combining very different aspects. I was looking at both testing of mechanisms, how cells interact with minerals in laboratory. And at the same time, I was looking at whatever signatures we got from this laboratory testing on in situ. So actually testing all this, let's say, observations on site. So this was quite difficult to make sure that I got a very coherent and, let's say, cohesive storyline for my grant. So it wasn't so easy to do. Fortunately, I've had examples from other researchers that actually wrote ERC advanced grants that were in the same field, so also life sciences. So I've had examples of other people that combined different aspects, and that was really very valuable to me, because I could kind of get a picture of what others did and then figure out what worked best for me. The other, let's say, the second point that was difficult was making sure that the novelty was very well explained. So this was something that I got a lot of help with from the writer, from this academic writing coach, because we actually she would ask me a lot of questions, and then I could answer the questions, and things were kind of settling about what exactly I should be saying when I try to explain to someone why this is important and what we know, what we don't know, what are the knowledge gaps, and so on. So these were some of the major, let's say, things that I've been using to kind of explain the novelty. What we know, how my team and I actually contributed over the years to this knowledge base, to what has been, let's say, formulated on that subject, then determining and really very clearly stating the knowledge gaps, so exactly what is not known and how exactly we intend to close it. And why does it matter? And I know that the ERC is not really interested in societal problems. That's not the point. However, I think explaining where this could go and kind of make it very clear so people really connect to real life challenges would be valuable, even if you're not bringing, let's say, an immediate impact to that challenge. So that was one other difficulty. And the third difficulty, I would say, was making these really clear statements regarding what is high risk and high gain in my proposal. And to make this clear, I think the best, at least in my opinion, is that when you have a hypothesis-driven research, you're often pretty much dealing with a new idea. So if your hypothesis can pretty much be challenged during your grant, and you will get an answer that's showing that it is true or false after you've done that research, then you could say that your idea is pretty new, because you obviously are giving an answer at the end, which we did not know before. And there could be very, let's say, different aspects of that and different degrees where an idea could be considered challenging or not, or novel. Another aspect regarding this new idea is that you also have to show that you are really the best person at actually executing that idea. So you can really, you should really possibly describe everything that led you to this, let's say, spot where you actually can, with your track record, really channel all that information you've learned in the past and really apply it into this new project. So in my case, for the application, I actually had, towards the end of my application, after I explained how everything was supposed to be done, I had almost 2/3 of a page that were pretty much explaining exactly what I've been doing and why I'm the right person to actually lead this project and to actually work on this idea. So it's been, it's a lot of information maybe, but I think it was probably a very good way to explain why this was really why it was a good idea that this particular PI should get that grant. In the next step, I'll just talk very briefly about this because this is a rather personal experience, right? So if you are lucky enough to get to the interview preparation, I personally really enjoyed the interview. So I thought the entire process was absolutely excellent. I thought it was such a challenge and quite interesting questions were asked. The preparation, this time I started very early. So I started about December 2021, preparing for the interview. I already had like a mock interview at my university around the same time. I got a lot of examples from other people of how they actually had their presentations made for consolidator level grants. And I had an internal panel at STU that was actually made of advanced grant holders. We did not have so many consolidator grants. We were lucky to get 2 in 2022, but the advanced holder grants grant holders actually joined, so I could get a lot of input from them. And other researchers actually that applied for consolidator grants just to tell me what their impressions were during the interview. However, they did not get them, but it was useful to know how they actually experienced this. And I must say that internal panel gave me a total shock. I think that was my worst talk ever. Maybe I wasn't very prepared because it was very early into the process, but I was very shocked. So that gave me such a boost to work hard and actually improve it, that it turned really well in the end. But it was not easy, and I changed it all. I pretty much thought of all the issues that were brought up. So maybe doing this type of kind of challenging yourself with such a panel quite early on to get all the bad questions thrown at you so you can really try to improve and really ask yourself everything you could ask yourself about, it worked very well for me. Then I had the interview in February, and the interview was really great. I really enjoyed it. The questions were absolutely excellent, things that were really very important to address before giving the money, to be fair. There were a couple of things that were like loose threads in my applications, and they really addressed every single one of them. So I must say, you have to really think if you have any of those. I knew I had them. I knew exactly where I had my loose threads. So I had a very good plan on how to answer those. So I answered very fast and very concise, and I got like 16 questions in 15 minutes. It was like a machine gun experience, but it worked very smoothly and nicely. So that's pretty much what I have. It's very, let's say, it's a very personal experience, as I told you. So I'm very curious if you have any questions.
Thank you so much. It was really personal, of course, but also very useful. Lots of really useful tips, tricks, and impressive with all your grant writing. So far, we do not have any questions, I'm afraid. But well, I do have a question for you. Could you elaborate, give a bit more details on how you choose the panels? Because you were sort of in between the PE panel and a LS panel. So what made you decide in the end?
So in the end, I decided on the life science panel because most of my application was very much oriented towards life sciences. So there was only a very small part of my application that included, let's say, earth sciences, geomicrobiology. So I felt that it was much more suitable and the reviewers would be more appropriate if I went for the life sciences. And fortunately, when I was applying, they had a new life science kind of structure. So for LS8, there was one that was specifically looking at climate change. And I was interested in how minerals that are relevant for climate change are actually impacting interactions between microbes. So this really helped, the fact that there was this new structure, and then I could actually find one panel that was very, very appropriate in my case. So I was to some degree very lucky, but what I did, it's exactly what Philip actually, I think Philip, or I'm not sure if Philip mentioned this, but it was mentioned before that you could choose multiple panels. So I've done exactly that. So I've chose LS8 as my major panel, and then I chose P10 just in case, making sure that if it doesn't work and there are not sufficient reviewers, maybe in LS8, maybe P10 would work. But it was rather by looking at abstracts and seeing what others were granted, who was granted LS8 panel grants, that I could make a good decision about that. So that,
Yeah, I'm really impressed with all the work you did before you started writing your application. This is also what we recommend from our side. I mean, how much time did you use on it? It seems like it must have been quite time consuming, of course, but in the end, but also time consuming. Yeah. Did you get any help for that, or did you do it on your spare time? Or?
I've actually done it mostly in my spare time, but I became aware later that so we had a shift in our I don't know what support office, grant support office. So a lot of people changed jobs at that time, so I could not really rely on them. But when they shifted, I think a lot of input regarding all this panel members and all that actually came from them. So information about the panel members was rather through our support office channels, but all the research regarding grant abstracts and everything was through the data hub that Philip presented. So it's very much just searching by myself and just trying to figure out what others got and how that type of grant is in any way related to what I do, so I can really make a good decision regarding the panel. And I really think it may matter quite a lot, because with the panel I applied for in 2017, that was a biotechnology panel, and they felt that I was not having the right background in the field, because I was not, they had no idea who I was to some degree. So I could imagine that it felt for them like I was a bit too new to the topic or something. I wasn't, but that was the impression, probably because I wasn't maybe known in that field as much. This is an assumption, of course. So, yes.
We still do not have any questions from the audience, but I have a question for Philippe, if you have time. I mean, I often get asked how you become an ERC evaluator, because this is something that a lot of Danes would like to be. And do you have any insights on that?
Thanks, Anne. The Scientific Council is actually the body that decides on the panel members or on the evaluators. It's they choose who they consider the most appropriate to be part of those panel. They take a lot of care in making sure that the panels are well balanced in terms of expertise, and I will leave the floor to Jesper to give more details. But please be aware that the remote reviewers at the step 2, those specialized experts at the step 2, are then chosen by the panel members at the end of the step 1 for the proposal advancing to step 2. But for the panel members who may be re-invited, 2 years after they've been part of an evaluation panel, up to 4 times they can be re-invited. Those are chosen by the Scientific Council. Jesper, do you want to complement what I just mentioned?
No, I think you more or less covered it. I think this it's not something you request to be. I think that it's something that the panel and the Scientific Council decide from the expertise and the profile of the research in question. And of course, to be fair, having a Danish vice president and having another Dane on council probably helps Danish science in terms of the number of people that we are aware of. This is sort of a fact of life that, of course, I know Danish researchers quite well, and so does Liselotte. So it will be natural that we will be looking in that direction when we need new reviewers. But that doesn't mean you can request to become a reviewer. That would be inappropriate. So it is really driven by the need of the panel and the need from the panel of expert opinions from written reports on individual proposals. So you can't ask to become a reviewer, I'd say.
And if I may complement what with another element, as I mentioned, at the agency of the ERC, we are not responsible for deciding on the choice of the panel member. That's really the prerogative and the mandates of the Scientific Council, and which is, I think, an excellent thing. But what we have to make sure is that we respect a minimum of rules for the composition of the panel. For example, we need to have a good balance between gender, so we take care that the Scientific Council conforms with that. We also need to have a certain balance in terms of geographical distribution. For example, no more than 2 experts can be of a host institution located in the same country. There can be exceptions, of course, but those are the kind of things in terms of procedure that we take care of, meaning that you will not end up in a panel, for example, with out of 13 panel members, 12 would be coming from a HR located in Germany or in France, for example. So this is something that the ERC takes a lot of care of. I have to say that the choice of the panel is really something that the Scientific Council is extremely dedicated to, and to which a huge attention is brought.
And it is also worth mentioning that we also really look at gender balance. We can't have a panel of only women or of only men. So there are lots of restrictions on how to put together a panel. We want previous ERC grantees because they are helpful in that they know what it takes. But we also don't want to fill the panel exclusively with such former grantees. So there's really a lot of restrictions, and the administration at ERCEA helps us make sure we keep to the rules and we have the right composition of these panels, because they are really the important reason why ERC has been so successful. We need to make the right decisions about funding, and therefore these panels really matter.
Yeah, thank you. We still do not have any questions, so I think I will end the webinar a bit before time. But thank you so much to all the speakers. It's really kind of you to take time out of your busy schedule to do this presentation. I think they were really useful. I will send out the recording of this webinar, and I will send out slides afterwards to all of you. And thank you so much, and hope you can use it for your applications. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Goodbye.